This isn't about self-improvement, it's about psychological recognition, because what I'm about to reveal doesn't just explain why people treat you differently, it exposes the unconscious power you carry that most will never understand. You'll stop wondering why conversations die when you enter. You'll start recognizing the psychic force that radiates from your integrated self. This doesn't make you better at fitting in. It makes you aware of why you were never meant to. And once you understand this truth, you don't go back to seeking their approval. You become comfortable with your psychological sovereignty. Before we begin, understand what you're encountering here. This isn't content about becoming more likable or socially acceptable. This is Carl Jung's analysis of psychic energy broken into brutal recognition. First, we'll expose the 13 unmistakable signs that your aura operates on a frequency most people can't handle. Second, we'll reveal why Jung believed this psychological intensity is actually evidence of inner integration, not social failure. And third, we'll show you how to navigate a world that fears the very authenticity it claims to want. This knowledge comes with a warning. Once you recognize these patterns, you can't pretend you're the problem anymore. You'll either embrace your psychological depth, or you'll waste your life trying to become smaller for people who will never appreciate your true nature. Choose wisely. Carl Jung spent decades studying what he called psychic energy, not some mystical force, but the invisible psychological presence that radiates from every human being. Unlike the popular notion of auras as colourful energy fields, Jung understood that your real aura is forged from something far more substantial. Your level of psychological integration, your relationship with your shadow, and your commitment to authentic self-development. Here's what most people refuse to understand. Your aura isn't determined by how positive, cheerful, or socially acceptable you are. It's determined by how much of yourself you've had the courage to face, integrate, and embody. The more you've confronted your darkness, processed your pain, and refused to live behind comfortable masks, the more psychologically powerful your presence becomes. And this power terrifies people. Not because you're aggressive or hostile, but because your energy exposes the psychological work they've been avoiding their entire lives. Your presence silently communicates a level of self-awareness that makes their carefully constructed personas feel fragile and transparent. Jung called this phenomenon unconscious transmission, the way authentic individuals unconsciously challenge others to confront their own psychological fragmentation. You're not trying to intimidate anyone, you're simply existing as someone who has done the inner work. But in a world full of people desperately avoiding that same work, your integrated presence feels like a threat. You speak from a place of psychological depth, not to impress or dominate, but because shallow communication feels spiritually suffocating. When others make small talk, you instinctively steer toward meaning. When they discuss surface-level topics, you unconsciously probe for underlying truths. And somehow, this always seems to make people uncomfortable. Jung understood that individuals who have integrated their unconscious material develop what he called psychological honesty, an inability to participate in collective self-deception. Your intensity isn't aggression, it's the natural expression of someone who has learned to live without internal masks. Most people experience this honesty as invasive because it forces them to feel emotions they've spent years suppressing. When you speak authentically, you're not just sharing thoughts, you're transmitting psychic energy that awakens their dormant psychological material. And for those who prefer to remain unconscious, that awakening feels like an attack. Your words carry the weight of integration. While others speak from their personas, their socially acceptable masks, you speak from your integrated self. This creates a psychic dissonance that people can feel but can't explain. They sense that you're operating from a different psychological frequency, one that doesn't validate their comfortable illusions. The moment someone begins discussing weather, television shows, or other meaningless topics, you feel an almost physical discomfort. It's not that you're antisocial or arrogant. It's that your psyche has developed an allergic reaction to psychological inauthenticity. Jung believed that individuals who have accessed their unconscious develop what he called symbolic thinking, a way of processing reality that seeks deeper meaning and connection. When forced into superficial communication, your integrated psyche rebels because it recognizes the conversation as psychologically empty. This creates an energetic disruption that others can sense. While they're comfortable with scripted social interactions, your aura unconsciously broadcasts, "This isn't real connection." People feel this resistance even when you're trying to be polite, and it makes them question the validity of their own communication style. Your discomfort with small talk isn't a social flaw. It's evidence that your psychological development has progressed beyond the need for empty verbal rituals. But in a world that uses small talk as social lubricant, your authentic hunger for meaningful connection marks you as psychologically different. Without seeking it, you've become a magnet for other people's pain, confusion, and hidden truths. Strangers tell you things they've never told anyone. Friends come to you during their darkest moments. Acquaintances suddenly share their most vulnerable experiences, often saying, "I don't know why I'm telling you this." Jung would recognize this as evidence that you carry what he called the wounded healer archetype. Your own psychological integration has created a psychic safe space that others unconsciously recognize. Your aura communicates depth, emotional safety, and the rare capacity to hold another person's shadow without judgment. But here's the cruel irony. While everyone seeks your psychological support, few offer the same depth of understanding in return. You become everyone's therapist while remaining psychologically isolated yourself. This happens because people are drawn to your integrated energy for healing, but they fear that same energy when it comes to genuine reciprocal intimacy. Your role as the unconscious confessor isn't chosen. It's the natural result of psychological development. People sense that you've faced your own darkness and emerged stronger, which makes them feel safe enough to reveal theirs. But this gift comes with the burden of carrying others' pain while rarely feeling truly seen yourself. When you look at someone, they look away. Not because you're staring or being inappropriate, but because your gaze carries a psychic weight that most people can't handle. Your eye contact has become what Jung called the gaze of the integrated self. It sees beyond social masks directly into psychological truth. This isn't supernatural vision. It's the natural result of having faced your own depths. When you've confronted your shadow, processed your trauma, and integrated your fragmented parts, your eyes begin to carry that wholeness. Others unconsciously sense that your gaze doesn't just see their persona, it sees their hidden psychology. Most people live in terror of being truly seen because true sight reveals their psychological fragmentation, their unhealed wounds, their carefully hidden insecurities. Your eye contact unconsciously communicates, "I see who you really are beneath the mask." For those not ready for that level of transparency, your gaze feels invasive and threatening. This avoidance isn't personal rejection, it's psychological self-protection. People instinctively avoid your direct gaze because they sense it would force them to confront aspects of themselves they're not prepared to face. Your integrated presence demands honesty, and honesty terrifies those still living behind psychological defenses. You walk into a room saying nothing, doing nothing unusual, yet someone becomes defensive, irritated, or strangely hostile. You're left wondering what you did wrong, but the truth is more complex. You didn't do anything wrong. You simply existed as an integrated individual in the presence of psychological fragmentation. Jung understood that when someone with integrated psychic energy encounters someone living behind masks, it creates what he called shadow projection. The fragmented person unconsciously projects their disowned psychological material onto you. They see in you the authenticity they've abandoned, the depth they've avoided, the integration they fear to pursue. Your presence acts as a psychological mirror, reflecting back their unlived potential and unprocessed shadow material. Instead of recognizing this as an opportunity for growth, they experience it as an attack on their carefully constructed identity. So they react defensively, not to anything you've said or done, but to what your integrated energy reveals about their own psychological state. This defensive reaction is actually a compliment, though it doesn't feel like one. It means your psychological integration has reached a level where your mere presence challenges others to confront their own inner work. You've become a living reminder of what's possible when someone chooses authenticity over comfort. The moment someone begins performing their socially acceptable personality, something inside you recoils. You can feel the inauthenticity like a physical discomfort, and although you try to be polite, your energy unconsciously broadcasts your psychological rejection of their mask. Jung called this phenomenon persona-allergic reaction, when an integrated individual's psyche instinctively rejects psychological inauthenticity. Having done the work to integrate your own persona with your authentic self, you can no longer tolerate the psychic dissonance of someone living entirely behind social masks. This creates an uncomfortable dynamic where your aura essentially says, "Drop the act. I can see through the performance." People sense this rejection of their persona even when you're being outwardly polite. They feel psychologically exposed and often respond by either becoming more performative, which increases your discomfort, or avoiding you entirely. Your inability to tolerate fake personas isn't judgment. It's the natural response of psychological wholeness, encountering psychological fragmentation. But in a world where most social interaction is persona-based, your authentic energy marks you as someone who disrupts the comfortable illusion of surface-level connection. Without arguing or being confrontational, your presence somehow makes people doubt themselves. They second-guess statements they would normally make with confidence. They find themselves justifying positions they never questioned before. They become uncertain about beliefs they once held absolutely. This happens because Jung's concept of psychological clarity creates what he called certainty dissonance. When someone with integrated self-awareness encounters someone living on psychological autopilot, the contrast becomes obvious. Your clarity exposes their confusion. Your self-knowledge highlights their self-deception. Your integrated certainty reveals their fragmented doubts. You don't need to argue or prove anything. The mere fact of your psychological integration serves as a silent challenge to their unexamined assumptions. Your presence asks without words, "Are you sure about that? Have you really thought this through? What are you avoiding by holding this position?" This questioning effect isn't manipulation. It's the natural result of one consciousness encountering another that operates from a deeper level of self-awareness. But for those who have built their identity on unexamined beliefs, your energy feels threatening to their entire psychological structure. They tell you their secrets, say you understand them like no one else, create what feels like genuine connection, then vanish without explanation. They stop calling, become distant, or even turn hostile. You're left confused about what went wrong, but the truth is that nothing went wrong. Something went too right. Jung would explain this as shadow revelation terror, when your integrated energy creates a safe space for someone to reveal their psychological depths. They experience temporary relief from carrying their hidden material alone. But once the moment passes, they're often terrified by how much they revealed and how deeply you saw into their psychological reality. Your aura didn't hurt them. It healed them temporarily by allowing authentic expression. But healing can be more frightening than suffering for those who have built their identity around their wounds. They realize that continuing the connection would require them to maintain that level of authenticity, which feels impossible for someone still living behind psychological defenses. This pattern of revelation followed by retreat isn't personal rejection. It's psychological overwhelm. They experienced what genuine connection feels like through your integrated presence, and the contrast with their normal masked existence became too stark to maintain. Bosses become defensive around you. Dominant personalities quiet down when you enter. People who normally control conversations start stumbling over their words. You haven't said or done anything challenging, but your energy somehow shifts the power dynamic in the room. Jung understood that integrated individuals naturally carry what he called inner authority, psychological sovereignty that doesn't depend on external validation or hierarchical position. This inner authority creates a psychic field that challenges artificial power structures based on dominance rather than genuine competence. Your aura unconsciously communicates, "You may have positional power, but you don't have psychological power over me." This message terrifies those whose authority depends on others' psychological submission. They sense that their usual manipulation tactics won't work on someone with integrated self-awareness. This isn't arrogance or disrespect. It's the natural expression of psychological wholeness. You don't challenge their authority directly, but your inner integration makes their authority feel less absolute. For those who depend on others' psychological weakness to maintain control, your strength feels like a direct threat. Despite approaching relationships with kindness and honesty, you somehow end up cast as the problem. They accuse you of being cold, arrogant, judgmental, or manipulative. They twist your boundaries into selfishness, your self-respect into ego, your authenticity into cruelty. Jung called this projection theatre, when psychologically fragmented individuals unconsciously project their disowned shadow material onto those who trigger their awareness of it. You become the screen onto which they project all the qualities they can't accept about themselves. Your crime isn't what you did, it's what you represent. Your integrated presence reminds them of their own psychological work avoided, their own authenticity abandoned, their own potential unlived. Rather than face this uncomfortable truth, they create a story where you're the villain and they're the victim. This villainization often happens when you refuse to enable their psychological dysfunction, or when you maintain boundaries that their persona can't manipulate. Your refusal to participate in their unconscious dramas forces them to either grow or find someone else to blame for their psychological discomfort. Certain people are magnetically drawn to you without understanding why. They describe feeling called to connect with you, sensing something different about your energy. These are usually individuals who are beginning their own psychological awakening and unconsciously recognize a guide in your integrated presence. Simultaneously, unconscious individuals seem to instinctively avoid you. They make excuses not to spend time with you, change the subject when you're mentioned, or express vague discomfort about your vibe without being able to articulate why. Jung would explain this as like a tracks-like on a psychic level. Those beginning to wake up psychologically are drawn to the integrated energy you represent. They sense the possibility of their own transformation in your presence. Meanwhile, those committed to remaining unconscious feel threatened by the same energy. Your aura operates like a psychological tuning fork, resonating with those ready for growth while creating dissonance in those still attached to their psychological sleep. This natural sorting mechanism often leaves you surrounded by seekers while feeling isolated from mainstream social connections. Within moments of entering any space, you can feel the unspoken tensions, hidden resentments, suppressed emotions and psychological undercurrents that others seem oblivious to. You don't need context or explanation. Your integrated psyche immediately reads the psychological climate. Jung called this unconscious perception, the ability to sense psychological information that operates below the threshold of normal awareness. Having integrated your own unconscious material, you've developed sensitivity to the unconscious dynamics operating in others and in group situations. This psychic sensitivity is both a gift and a burden. It gives you profound insight into human behavior and motivation, but it also makes you vulnerable to psychological overwhelm. You're constantly processing emotional and psychic information that others don't even know exists. People often mistake this sensitivity for paranoia or overthinking, but Jung understood it as evidence of advanced psychological development. Your integrated consciousness has expanded beyond the personal to access what he called the collective unconscious, the shared psychological patterns that operate beneath surface reality. There's a loneliness in you that has nothing to do with social isolation. It's the loneliness of being psychologically different, of operating on a frequency that few others share. Since childhood, you've felt like an observer of human behavior rather than a natural participant in it. Jung believed that certain individuals are born with what he called the call to individuation, an inner drive towards psychological wholeness that sets them apart from collective consciousness. These individuals often feel like strangers in their own culture, family, or social group, because they're naturally oriented toward growth rather than conformity. Your sense of not belonging isn't a character flaw, it's evidence that your psyche is oriented toward transcendence rather than adaptation. You were never meant to fit into existing psychological structures because your purpose is to evolve beyond them. This otherworldly quality in your aura reflects someone who has touched depth that most people spend their lives avoiding. You carry wisdom that feels ancient, insights that seem to come from beyond normal human experience. People sense this depth and respond with either reverence or fear, but rarely indifference. Jung warned that the path of individuation, becoming psychologically whole, comes with costs that most people aren't prepared to pay. As you integrate your shadow, process your trauma, and develop authentic self-awareness, you inevitably become isolated from collective consciousness. This isolation isn't punishment, it's the natural result of psychological evolution. As your consciousness expands, the gap between your inner reality and normal social reality widens. You begin to see through the illusions that most people depend on for psychological comfort. You can no longer participate in collective self-deception. Your integrated aura becomes a constant reminder to others of the psychological work they're avoiding. Without saying a word, your presence asks, when will you stop running from yourself? When will you face your shadow? When will you choose growth over comfort? Most people aren't ready for these questions, so they experience your energy as threatening rather than inspiring. They sense that accepting your influence would require them to abandon their comfortable psychological patterns and embark on the difficult journey of self-confrontation. We live in a world that rewards psychological conformity and punishes authentic self-expression. The educational system teaches you to suppress your natural psychological development in favour of social compliance. The workplace demands that you present an acceptable persona rather than your authentic self. The dating market teaches you to perform attractiveness rather than embody genuine confidence. Into this psychologically constipated environment walks someone who has done the inner work, someone whose aura radiates integration, authenticity, and depth. Your presence disrupts the unspoken social contract that says everyone will pretend to be normal in exchange for acceptance. People don't know how to categorize someone who isn't seeking their approval, isn't performing for their comfort, isn't afraid of their judgment. Your integrated energy operates outside the normal frameworks of social control, which makes you psychologically dangerous to systems built on collective unconsciousness. This danger isn't violent or malicious, it's evolutionary. Your presence suggests possibilities that threaten the status quo of psychological mediocrity. You represent what people could become if they had the courage to face themselves honestly. Jung understood that those who answer the call to individuation often experience what he called spiritual loneliness, the isolation that comes from operating on a different psychological frequency than most people. This loneliness can't be cured by finding more friends or being more social, because it's not about external connection. Spiritual loneliness is the recognition that your psychological development has progressed beyond the point where surface-level relationships can satisfy your need for authentic connection. You need people who can meet you at the depths you've accessed, who can hold the intensity of your integrated presence without flinching. This kind of connection is rare because it requires two people who have both done significant inner work. Most people are too psychologically fragmented to sustain authentic intimacy with someone whose aura radiates integrated wholeness. The temptation is to shrink yourself, to dim your authentic presence in order to make others more comfortable. But Jung warned against this spiritual self-betrayal. He understood that your integrated energy is not just personal development, it's a service to collective consciousness, a beacon for others who are ready to begin their own journey toward wholeness. In a world that demands psychological conformity, simply being yourself becomes a revolutionary act. Your integrated aura challenges every system built on human unconsciousness, the political structures that depend on collective ignorance, the economic systems that exploit psychological insecurity, the social hierarchies that reward superficial performance over authentic depth. You don't need to be an activist or rebel to threaten these systems. Your mere existence as someone who has done the inner work, who refuses to live behind masks, who operates from integrated self-awareness rather than programmed responses, is enough to disrupt the entire framework of collective unconsciousness. This is why your presence feels dangerous to so many people. They sense that accepting your influence would require them to question everything they've been taught about normal human behaviour. They would have to admit that their entire approach to life has been based on avoiding the very psychological work that you've embraced. Your aura doesn't just reflect personal integration, it carries the revolutionary potential of human consciousness itself. You represent what becomes possible when someone chooses growth over comfort, authenticity over acceptance, psychological truth over social convenience. If you've recognized yourself in these signs, you're facing a crucial choice. You can spend your energy trying to make yourself more acceptable to those who can't handle your authentic presence. Or you can embrace the psychological sovereignty you've developed and use it to serve your continued growth and the awakening of others. Jung's message was clear. The world desperately needs individuals who have done the inner work, who can model what psychological integration looks like, who can serve as beacons for others ready to begin their own journey toward wholeness. Your aura doesn't scare people because you're broken or too much. It scares them because you're rare. In a world addicted to psychological comfort, authentic presence will always feel threatening to those still hiding from themselves. But for those ready to grow, your integrated energy feels like coming home. They recognize in your presence the possibility of their own transformation. They sense that connection with you would support their own journey towards psychological wholeness. The question isn't whether you should change to accommodate those who can't handle your authentic presence. The question is whether you have the courage to fully embrace the psychological sovereignty you've developed and use it to serve the evolution of human consciousness. Your aura is not a problem to be solved. It's a gift to be honored, a responsibility to be accepted, and a power to be wielded with wisdom in service of truth.